one that's listed in red, and I have this lower one, but that one's fine. But I do have those as part. Right, basically. And all these are doing, they're just kind of like receiving like pings. So basically it's like, okay, has this process ran in the last little while? And it gets these pings by, if I open up this one, it's basically this line and then the last one. So it kind of sends that signal out to site 24/7 to say, hey, this script started, and hey, this script ended. So what's kind of odd right now is that it seems like it may have started, but maybe it never finished. And so that's kind of basically, yeah. And then here in the schedule task, it doesn't look like it's running, right? Um, it says it's ready, and it does say that it has the 4-hour schedule. Um, not on the site 24/7 side. So that's kind of where I'm like, okay, well, did it run the last couple times? And it kind of seems like it has, right? Because it wants to run again at this upcoming 4-hour kind of block, which is going to be at noon. And we have these previous ones that were attempted. So this almost makes it seem like it didn't really do anything except for when I ran it manually, maybe yesterday, which would have been like probably around this time when I kind of noticed that initial issue. And then this other one is saying launch request ignored, instance already running. And this is something that I have noticed. So, okay, so one thing exactly. And so this is actually something I kind of shared with Jeff Cantwell as well about a different process. So over here on this other server, the PowerShell scripts one, under this area here, we have one that syncs, like anytime somebody would update their password in WebStar, and actually this is like when ANR is using the old password reset tool. So when they reset a password there, this process actually picks up the WebStar password side of it change, and it actually does the sync into the staff AD and the students AD behind the scenes. So like that old password reset tool, it used to be like PortalGuard, where it could do like all three like simultaneously, basically. But then at one point or another, that kind of stopped working properly. So we kind of switched to this behind the scenes approach. So really, the old password reset tool only updates the WebStar password. And then from there, it syncs it out to the other spots via this process. And sometimes like when this server reboots or does like updates and stuff, after the reboot, this particular one, it ends up having like an error. And it's like what you said, like it's almost like it did the reboot maybe while it was in the middle of one of those runs. Yeah. And so you kind of have to trick it by just going here and running it manually once, and then it's back to normal, you know? And that's kind of what I thought was the issue for this one. So I'm kind of surprised that after I ran it manually, at 4 something yesterday, that it just didn't, go back to normal. So what I'm going to do next is, since these two are PowerShell scripts that in turn call the PHP stuff, I should be able to use the PowerShell ISC deal here just to run it, and then we could just see what happens basically. So that's true. That's true. I think Microsoft is still making inroads to maybe just unify it so that it's all PowerShell, at some point. But definitely, like when you're using the regular command prompt, it is different than if you're using the PowerShell one. And I think where that kind of comes into play sometimes is like just like little syntax type things, that crop up. So, and like here, like at the top, like if I want to call like another procedure inside of a PowerShell file, I'll have to use this ampersand. And I want to say when you're doing it more from like the regular command prompt, that's not necessary. So that might be like one example of like a syntax type difference. So right now it's basically running those queries. So it's on the person one, I think, still right here. So like for this one, since we have the term code set to auto, it's gonna look ahead and to the current term kind of. And it's going to run through all those terms first before it proceeds to like the courses. Yeah, it usually takes a couple minutes. And then the other side of it that I can usually check would be on the Canvas side. I wonder sometimes if the security process or something, or is it just WinSCP being buggy? I had a connection open over there, but looks like it got killed. Okay. Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's still going over there. I just wanted to see um, if it, you know, each time it makes a submission for one of these files, um, like each of these little pieces here, that's going to correspond with this part updating with a time stamp of some sort. Right, at least that like this server can send things up to the Canvas server, for example. Um, okay, so now it's going. Yep, yep. So it's doing that. Let me see if the site 24/7 piece got updated. Okay, so we do have that green again, and it's going to be green until the next expected one kind of crops up, you know? Because when I did that at 4:10, I was like, oh, okay, maybe because I did some Windows updates yesterday on like a couple of the servers because they had, that pop up. Right. So I did those and it was around that 4 o'clock time frame, I think, for this one. So I was like, oh well, maybe I kind of accidentally interfered with that run. And so I ran it manually. And I was like, okay, everything's hunky-dory, But then at 8, I kind of got another notification saying like, hey, like that it didn't seem like it ran. So that kind of threw me off a little bit. Yeah, so I'm gonna let this, like, I'm not seeing anything here that's indicating, or at least, well, once we get to the end, hopefully, I'm not seeing anything that seems like anything's hanging, right? Everything seems like it's running normally as expected and all that. So from that perspective, it's looking good. So if this all completes as expected, probably what I'll try and do is maybe do the run manually part here. Mainly because here in the history, I'm not seeing anything for today, and that's the part that I guess is kind of bothering me about the task. The other part I was telling Jeff was that for that other one, the banner passwords one, I kind of feel like one of these alternative options could kind of help with that. But I've always been a little bit leery at making those adjustments because, like, for example, run a new instance in parallel. Like, you could imagine if something does mess up or something, that you might have like 10 of them running in parallel or something because none of them are closing. I think that's always been kind of like the concern I've had for those. Yeah, and just double checking that everything's enabled for the schedule. Everything looks good there. Maybe one thing I'll do is I'll just save it one more time. I don't feel like that's typically necessary because nothing really changed. But worth a shot. Okay, so that's still progressing. We'll pretty much get back to like the command prompt, like where you could run the next command. So that's kind of like the main signal. Yeah, so we're on the enrollments. It looks like already. So And then these two I would expect to be a little bit quicker, and then the cleaning process should be pretty quick too. Right, right. And it did help from that perspective. And there was some of my notes I was writing for another server, the HR scripts one, that I was attempting to kind of do some of that collaboration with the code site with Alex. But I do know that and I think I may have shared this with you a little bit at one point, where I kind of struggled. So normally when multiple people are working on the same like code base, they're kind of doing it usually from their own workstations, and then it's getting kind of like maybe automatically brought into like a central server, for example, where like that server like pulls in the changes. But since we didn't really have that sort of setup, what I was attempting to do was like using the central server as kind of like that main point to do the code development rather than doing the PowerShell stuff on my own machine. But that didn't really work out so well, because it works out well if I'm only using one account and like it's just me logging into a server. But when I was trying to do that with Alex, well, one of those folders has to be the primary. And then in Alex's case, he would have to know that he needs to pull in maybe any changes that I had added in the meantime. So it just kind of didn't work out kind of as nicely as I was hoping for that. Yeah, but Abelardo is working on his machine, and you're pulling in updates to the repository only, let's say. That would be one way to potentially run some tests at least. Because really the scripts, all they're doing is they're generating files, you know. Right. And I did I think may have made you an admin into it over the weekend, but I'll double check right now. I know I added Jeff for sure, but I think I added you as an admin. Okay, I did make you an admin in the site, so when you do log in, you in theory should have access to this admin panel too, which mainly gives you access to some of this other stuff here. And I think maybe it gives you access to the other repositories just generally. So at least, you know, there's a little bit more you could kind of do. Well, we do have the repository here. I'm just saying that like in terms of keeping it kind of like synced up, like between Alex and myself, it was a little bit challenging. So that was the part that was the most challenging part. So here it looks like everything was successful. I'm just going to trigger it one more time from this side, even though it's going to run again at noon. Maybe that'll give me some extra. See here, we have the event, right? Like we actually started it and it gave us a little bit of something in the history. Okay, but more than likely, that's all it is. I've noticed this happening more since moving to the newer versions of Windows Server, which is weird because I don't recall this ever being like a problem before, like under the old Server 2008 kind of version we had. So I don't know. Generally, yeah, especially for this one. Like if I run this one manually just the one time, you know, it'll be good for, you know, until the next time that kind of crops up. So no, I mean, I definitely feel that the issue crops up like when a reboot occurs. I mean, not necessarily a general reboot. It could be, you know, an update reboot, or sometimes we do have these instances where, let's say, like every 2 weeks on a Sunday, some weird stuff kind of happens with the servers. So it could be related. It seems to happen quite often on Sundays. Yeah. So I don't know if that ties in with the backup schedule or if it ties in with anything else. Right. And like that issue that I'm talking about, like basically we'll get quite a few notifications about servers and things being down. But like if you later check on those servers, some of them may have ended up rebooting, and then in other cases, they don't seem like they rebooted at all. So it's just kind of hard to know, well, what's triggering that without more information, which I don't have. Oh, okay, gotcha. I was like, which system are you referring to? But it's the code site. Um, so since you can log into the script server, maybe if you want to verify, I feel like these scheduled tasks, you may not see them under your account. Could you let me know if that's accurate? No, yeah, the PHP one. So if you just, yeah, pull up the task scheduler, I'm curious if you see these three folders that I've created for these different tasks or not. The only one I okay, good. That's mainly what I wanted to verify because I seem to recall that in a different situation that it wasn't in the other account, but it may be that once you're an admin, it always shows up. So, and yeah, yeah. And typically it is closed like that by default. Like, so, so you have to expand it anyway. So, okay, so that's good. Um, Okay, so that's running behind the scenes. So I feel like this one's fine. You know, like I'm not really seeing much in the way of like, oh, there's a big problem going on here. So if it's anything, it's going to have to do with some sort of weirdness with the task scheduler itself, just like not running things the way it's supposed to, rather than the code. You know? No, actually, I was going to pop in here just to show. So so for example, like let me just see though, which one does it call first? Section, and then enrollment. Okay. Yeah, that's true. The section is the container, and then the enrollment's container. Okay. So we have section faculty. I didn't even make a connection that time. It's still like errored out. I was going to show you something else, but I think this is probably you'd be more interested in this part for now. So okay, um, so for each of these right section ones, I just copied this section one as my starting point, I believe, you know, because it's going to be the most similar to these other ones. But probably like in this situation for ASG, you might want to start with, let's say, this faculty one, because maybe some of the stuff I had to cut out from the section one is already cut out, you know, some of that cruft. Yeah. So if we start with this section faculty one, we have all this boilerplate type stuff at the top. So this sync type ends up corresponding with the table that gets created like underneath the hood. Um, and basically this base class, which is here, has some of that extra code that kind of like knows what to do with that information. But like each of the files you'll notice has the sync type defined. So like the sections one has just like section. The courses one might just say course here, and so on. The main part of it is going to be the sync piece to it. In addition to, well, the table part, you shouldn't really need to adjust it. So all this is getting created on the MySQL side, the database that this one's tied into. So the syncing process, so it's based off of those term codes too. So like when you pass in auto, it kind of automatically pulls in the current list and it just loops through those. What it does is it makes sure that the table is created. It does that default row status. And it just does the syncing part of it here. So this part probably wouldn't need an adjustment. The default row status, that should be fine too. sync section. So this is where it's actually doing that Oracle query. So this part, you mean? Yeah. So definitely this is that key part, right? Like when we were kind of trying to come up with how to do it, I was like, well, I have to know like which shell we're going to put all this stuff into. And so I believe this corresponds to like a special value there in the settings for the course, which if you create a course, like an ad hoc course, it doesn't have that value populated by default. So you definitely, right. So this part for sure, we would need to update that. And we have this key for the term and the key that's going to correspond to probably like the section itself. Yeah, this one's going to be kind of simple because we're just talking about the section, right? And it's just like one section that we're adding in, or one for each term. And then all this is kind of already done as well. So like this wouldn't really need any adjustments. The sending part knows what to do, so that one wouldn't need any adjustments. This part, all those columns are the same, so that wouldn't need any adjustments. So yeah, probably for this one, it's really gonna just be like, maybe like these two like pieces, like the actual course ID being different, they go into, and then since these aren't really gonna be like faculty, you might put like the ASG or something, yeah. So this one's pretty straightforward. So for the enrollments though, that one might be a little bit more, because we actually have to know, okay, where are we pulling the students from? So we would make the adjustment here, enrollment underscore ESG or something like that. And I guess the class name and all that good stuff too would be adjusted. Although since you're calling these files like individually, even if you don't necessarily change this, it wouldn't necessarily break it. But for consistency, you'd want to do it. So yeah, again, all this stuff is all fine. But this is where we're actually pulling the students from Banner. So if you have that way to identify them, so long as we're still matching up with the same column names, everything else should be fine. Okay. Encourage them. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so that query is probably going to be the main spot here, basically. Yeah, and I don't think that's here though. So the key part here might be corresponding to the little section that they're being added in, because for the section file, we are creating one section, I think, for every term dot faculty combo. And those are being associated with the one course. But on the enrollment side, you're associating them with this value, with the section part. I know it's probably a little bit confusing, but it's because you have like the courses, but then you have the sections in the courses. Sort of. So let me see. Back over here. Dun, 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 dun. I'm sure it's easier to find it. Let's pretend it's this one, even though it might not be. You know, that one's called like IVC something, right? Oh, there, the one right in front of my face. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So basically what I was trying to say is that we have this one course, right? But we have all these different sections that are in it. And see, oh, this is the all one. So the other one would have .faculty for these. So the right. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. That this section file is the one that creates these different sections, and they're going to have 0 users, right? Because no enrollments yet. And then the second file is actually going to populate those. So that's just kind of the main piece there. So this is what ties them together though. So is this key value. So this one would have to match up with whatever you're using for each term on this side. And indirectly, like this ivc.faculty.shell, I think is only used in this section file. So you're not going to see it or need to adjust it in the enrollment side. If that makes sense. Oh. Oh. Yeah, that's true. But yeah, so the enrollment part isn't going to have IVC like you're not going to have to do this update in the other file. So it's just in the section file that it's relevant. Yeah, and it might be like a way that you could kind of do where it's more of like an on-off rather than like by term type setup. Because the way these two files are set up right now, it is kind of like a little bit more of that term-based, right, configuration. So there might be something there to, let me think. So term code, we're pulling from the term codes there. Yeah, I guess even for something like this, you could have it where, you know, maybe it's creating some sort of like infinity date, you know, where it's not really an expiring for the term and this part. Although that does get passed along, but I think that's just the start and end date for the course rather than the start and end date of the term or anything like that. Yeah, and I guess at the very worst, you know, within the course itself, maybe the older sections as they drop off, you know, the old ones can just be deleted from the course, and that would at least eliminate the past ones if they're no longer currently ASG. Yeah, and that would give like Yareli that ability to do that on her end. So that would be like that little workaround for the past terms. Okay, I think there's some option there. Yeah.